Welcome to Code with JV, AI Snapshot number 9. I left it a bit late on this, so I had a lot of stuff to sort through, and I've got two browsers full of tabs. I'll show you the first one, and the second I'll just put in links in the description. Let's jump into it. Falcon 2, or Falcon 180B, is out. Hugging Face have the great overview of it, and it is a big model. Beating all the Llama 2s, they say it's better than GPT 3.5 in some of the measures, and it's slightly below Palm Large. So it's right up there with the closed models, and it takes the title as the most powerful and biggest open access model you can get your hands on. What is that open access language? So Hugging Face is starting to be quite precise about the difference between open access and open source. You can see the size of the Falcon model compared to the others. We know this technology gets better with size. You can get demos of it and have a play around yourself and see what you can do with it. But if you're thinking about equivalent to GPT 3.5, you're probably in the right ballpark. And the hardware requirements are a bit monstrous. If you want to fine tune it, it's like 5 terabytes of graphics card memory. And if you want to do inference, you're talking about 640, 320 gigabytes. So if you want to run this at home, start researching graphics card clusters, which, I'd love to do. But anyway, this isn't consumer grade model. It's an open access commercial grade model. It doesn't have a prompt format. It isn't fine-tuned or trained as a chat model. It is instead a powerful foundational model that you can get access to, particularly through the Hugging Face infrastructure. So Hugging Face have done a bunch of work to integrate it, and you can get access to it and hire a bunch of GPUs if you want to fine-tune it, etc. It is free for certain commercial use. Its license is an interesting one, and it all comes down to this hosting use. You can't use it if it is for a shared instance or managed service, but you can if it is for work that runs in the background, not considered to be hosting use. So it's kind of got like a very nuanced view, which you'd want some legal folks to give you an opinion on, is your use case permitted by it? So you can start to see the intent of the researchers behind this is there's certain activities that they want to make money off and other ones which they're fine for people to build on. So it's this kind of hybrid open access and not open source. Hey, OpenAI has made an enterprise version. You can see the differences here. You get high-speed GPT-4, 32K context, unlimited use. If you notice the stars on these ones here, you're essentially getting 50 messages every 3 hours. It also doesn't have a price. Your procurement department talks to their sales team and figures something out. And if that's not your world, then you just don't get access to the shiny things. OpenAI also came out with a blog post, which was it's nice, it's got good things in it, but it's not groundbreaking at all. It does indicate their intent of using this in education. I think education's a sensitive use case for people. Like, do you want kids to access this? They're referencing Ethan Mollick's work. One useful thing, great stuff, highly recommend it, really good educator. But it gives you some example prompts, and it's a useful starting point for anyone who's teaching and in education who has heard scary things or hasn't used it themselves. This is a very safe and easy entry point that's worth sharing with teachers out there. Here's a couple of things of other educational stuff out there for folks. This was an interesting research project where they took GPT-4 and put it in creativity tests with students. It was called the Torrance Tests for Creative Thinking. It was delivered by a private company. They had some real people do it. They had the AIs do it. They didn't tell the assessors that they were even doing that. They just asked them to assess it. The assessors used private questions, so they weren't on the internet. GPT-4 crushed it. Top 1% for originality of all test takers. This sort of tracks with what I've seen with people where it is really good at creative tasks and thinking outside of the box and give you more ideas about things as a brainstorming companion. It's really good at that kind of stuff. So if you are thinking about teaching it or using it, that's one domain which is really interesting. This blog post goes into more details about the user's experience of that. Here's another fun one from an educator, a computer science teacher who's teaching CS3250, so algorithm stuff. He spoke about how he was teaching his students using ChatGPT and helping them learn about where it's useful and where it's not. And then also sneakily, he made a fake student in the exam, was GPT 3.5, who sat the exam and the tutors didn't know it was an AI or that an AI was taking it. They scored a C-. So at the end of the class, he got to say, hey, everyone, you beat ChatGPT. He had students who were like, am I going to get a job? Is this going to crush my career? I spent 4 years learning this stuff. But it was GPT 3.5 and it wasn't using any fancy prompting techniques. The article doesn't say that. I had to hit him up on LinkedIn. If it was taking GPT-4 and starting to use like chain of thought or tree of thought or all the other of thought methodologies, you'd expect it to score a bit better. But it's just a great story about how an educator was practically using it and weaving it into their practice. Here's a great article. They're not people, and if we give them tests designed for people, we're not accurately assessing their abilities. It's a big topic with lots of ideas, and I'd encourage you to read this article if you're interested in testing AIs or testing people. Just because an AI does well on a human-based test doesn't mean it has abilities in that area. It just means it can pass that test. And tests for humans often have a lot of assumptions baked in. We've built up a body of practice about how to test people and determine their competencies and abilities, etc. But it's not the same with AIs because they're quite different creatures, beings, machine intelligences, whatever you want to call them. I wouldn't call them a creature or a being yet. Yeah. Meta have released Facet. This is a benchmarking tool for fairness in vision models. It is a benchmarking methodology and data set to go alongside of it, which can basically look for bias in image-based models. Here's a blog post where they're measuring their own Dino V2, which I'll go to in a second, using this methodology. Here you can start to see they compared it with OpenClip and Seer2. The higher the number, the more biased it is. In this case, Dino 2 is a bit worse on gender and a bit better on age and a bit better on skin tone. They also let it do this categorization based off classes. So when talking about nurses, well, Dino is way more biased, 17 I think it got, and Seer2 and OpenClip were even worse. Researchers will tell us what they think of this methodology over time, but I think it's great that we're starting to see more standards for measuring bias in models. But also, if you think about nursing as an example, and a case of, say it's a text-to-image generator that you're testing, and you say nurse 100 times, and it shows you 100 pictures, if the gender split was even, well, that's going to be very different to what reality looks like. And if the gender split is what the industry looks like, then it's going to be a very biased output. Where should it land? Should you aim for an equal split amongst genders? Should you aim for representing the world as it is? Should you aim for somewhere in between? And I think it's always going to be a judgment call, and different people will want it to do different things. It's great that we're seeing tools to measure bias, and I'd love to see more things in there, and I'd love to see egregious bias removed from models. And also, I think it's always going to come down to humans in the loop to decide what it should be, and people have different opinions on it. Dino V2, it is a family of models for 8 different types of visual tasks. It's a little bit like low level, depth estimation, etc. It's Apache 2, so it's completely unrestrained open source. You can use it for different things there. And I think it's interesting to see how Meta is doing more nuanced open licensing, where they'll make different choices based off the models they're releasing. Llama V2, okay, it was free for commercial use, but open access, not open source. You couldn't use it unless you had less than 700 million active users. And you can see Falcon coming down with things. And I think we're going to see this blur of licensing constraints as different companies release different open things. Here's another fun one from Meta. It's a model called cotracker. And essentially it is a image model where you can see what part of this image moves over time. And here you'll see the frame moving, but also it's seeing how the bear moves by putting lots of dots and seeing where they land. Low level, open source. I'm seeing a lot of things happening in the vision space. So like, yes, the large language models are out there, but all the other AI streams, well, they're starting to double down and get better. There's an amazing amount of stuff happening in vision as well. Here's an object detection leaderboard on Hugging Face. So if you want to mess around with different models, looking for the Hugging Face leaderboards in that area, whether it's embeddings or object detection, etc. And this is like is this a coffee cup, or is that a bus or a traffic light or a bicycle? Yes, AI is pretty good at defeating captchas these days. I haven't looked, but you might be able to get little plugins in your browser to get through them, which, hey, would make my life easier. But also, as a developer, it means that it's hard to keep AIs out of systems if they're starting to defeat captchas regularly. It's always a constant arms race between bots trying to defeat captchas and companies trying to validate if someone really is human. So this is a cool video. Google's DeepMind team doing soccer stuff. There's clear cooperation going on in this. They basically got motion capture of people, showed this to some vanilla AI agents, put them in a simulated environment and said, hey, go learn how to do stuff. And they gave them some rewards. And it took them about 1.5 years of simulated time to learn like dribbling and kicking and shooting, etc. A day of real time, but years from the computer's point of view, going in this simulated reality of like, oh, okay, here's how I do what you want me to do. And it took them 20 to 30 years of simulated time to learn how to coordinate and teamwork. And I also read in this that they didn't incentivize them for teamwork, they incentivized them for individual performance. It was like an emergent behavior. If you ever wonder why there's so much soccer stuff in research, there's a thing called the RoboCup, who's started in the 90s, and their goal was by 2050 to field a team of autonomous robotic soccer players who beat the World Cup champions. And if you think about things like exponential growth, if the technology is on an exponential curve, well, 2048, the robotic soccer players will be very poor. 2049, they'll still be like a very average team. And if you're just better than them 2050, you will just beat the world champions. Like all the growth happens in that final year if you're sort of doubling each year or whatever exponential growth rate is. And humans are horrible about reasoning about exponential growth. The other part of it is, if that growth continues, how good will they be in 2051, 52, 53, etc.? AI's finally beat humans at a real life sport, and it's drone racing. It also makes you think about, well, what other areas would be accessible, like Formula One? Could you imagine a robot beating humans at Formula One? I could. There's a lot of areas before you get to soccer and a very physical sort of game. Congrats to the team who are doing this. Here's a fun Amazon project. You can now pay for stuff using your palm, and it's a contactless wave sort of situation. I think 500 Whole Foods are rolling it out. But the interesting part of this is where the generative AI came into it. Basically, there's not enough palm pictures out there to train a large model. That data's not out there, and it's very expensive to go and get, millions of people's palm pictures. So they got a small subset of it, trained a model to generate fake palm pictures, and made millions of them, and used the millions of fake palms to train this thing to recognize a palm. And it dramatically increased the accuracy of the system. It was key to getting it ready for production. I think it's an interesting point that just because training data is fake or synthetic, it doesn't mean it isn't useful. It's a little bit similar to just because an LLM can hallucinate and imagine things doesn't mean it's not useful. You have to manage around it. So synthetic training data, it's got good things and it's got bad things. And if you know what they are, you can use it effectively. And here's a team at Amazon doing just that. Hey, Call of Duty, they're rolling out voice moderation in their chat, because if you think about voice, pretty hard to moderate. And so they're rolling out AI voice detection to spot what's happening and to auto moderate people if they're being abusive or bullying or all that sort of stuff, which, hey, good on them. Because, reducing toxicity in computer game culture is good on you and good luck. But I think it's another interesting case of where we're going to see this technology applied. So OpenAI put out a post around moderation using GPT-4 saying it's a really good use case of the technology is as computer moderation. If you think about Facebook having 15,000 human moderators on staff, can't keep up with all the things, I think it's possible to imagine a world where AI does a massive amount of moderation in our digital spaces. Voice, images, text, etc., go through an AI filter to auto flag it. You can imagine being a good thing and also a bad thing. A really good thing for cleaning up the internet, and it can also be a very scary thing and oppressive thing, because one person's safety is another person's oppression. I think we're going to start to see this bigger distinction between moderated spaces and unmoderated spaces, and people making their choices about which ones to participate in, etc. It does remind me of the quote, I think it was that George Orwell didn't imagine that everyone would buy their own surveillance devices. As you think about cell phones and people just purchasing all the microphones and cameras which can spy on them, what's the role going to be between people who opt into and choose to be in moderated spaces and people who don't have a choice apart from being in them? I think it's just going to be a fascinating, wider dialogue in society about the appropriate uses of these tools for moderation. Let's finish with some rumors. Here's did you saw it tweet? Is it an Zeet? Oh, I don't care. Here's someone who was at a Meta social and they're like, yeah, we have the compute for Llama 3 and 4 and we're getting ready to release it and we plan to make it open. The idea that Llama 3, they're trying to make as capable as GPT-4. I think a lot of people don't realize the difference in capability between GPT 3.5 and GPT 4, or the difference in capability that's there. And 4, it just wins all the benchmarks. The idea of an open model touching that strength, I think, is going to be a massive lift for people. And also, Google's Gemini, if they release a Gemini that's stronger than GPT-4, I think it's going to be a massive coup because they got so much shade for falling behind in AI. I think it's really interesting looking at the big tech companies and seeing their differences. Like if you think about Meta, for example, makes all its money off ads. They just want the best AI so they can use it to sell more ads to people and support their business model. So they're going this open route where they don't really care if other people have great AIs. They just want to have good ones to meet their needs. Whereas OpenAI, well, they make money by selling the best AI on the planet to people. If someone else has the best AI on the planet, that's going to really hurt their bottom line. The stuff I'm reading is like OpenAI getting ready for GPT-5, and they're going to try and make GPT-5 better than Gemini and manage the timing of it so that they can have the strongest commercially accessible AI, which people can buy. And that's their model, and they're not releasing anything out in the open. They're keeping it all close because they don't want to make their competitors better. As you think about Google and Microsoft and Amazon and what they're doing and how they're doing it, it all sort of comes back to just, their corporate imperatives. It's an interesting time. And the final thought for me is there's an election coming up in New Zealand, and the next government, well, they're going to govern through GPT-5, 6, Llama 3 and 4, Gemini. All these progress in the technology is going to happen in one term of government. A lot of the governments around the world are going to be rolling out regulations around AI in that time. I think it's easy for a lot of people to underestimate just how turbulent the next 3 years might be because of this technology. That's it for today. It's a fun time to be paying attention to the technology. If you want me to go into more depth, you want less links or more links, it's like feedback in the comments. I'm happy to adapt based off what you want. I really enjoy just doing the research and prepping these things, but also I'm happy to modify it based off people's preferences. So get in touch if you want to be different. Codewithjv.com/snapshot if you want to get them in your email, and I put a bit more analysis in there as well. Take care.